Senator Tester.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank Senator Corker for his questions. I'm not going to repeat them. I think they're spot on. It's too bad everybody in the Senate can't hear the concerns that you put forth, because your bosses put forth the same concerns. To get to the point that I want to talk about, I want to talk about regulation. And smaller institutions, as the gentleman from Louisiana pointed out, are fundamentally different than larger banks and should be regulated and should have regulation applied to them in a way that's consistent and appropriate with that size and risk. And I'm very concerned that many of the regulations included in the Dodd-Frank bill, particularly those intended to create a level playing field for community banks, will not be effective until and unless we have more clarity and consistency with respect to how those regulations are enforced. I'm going to try to take as little time as possible, so you guys be very concise with your answers. It would be very good. Mr. Ducres, you talked about one-size-fit-all from a regulatory standpoint. Is that what you see is happening in Louisiana from the Fed and FDIC standpoint, that there isn't a differentiation being made?
Right. And so it's a combination of safety and soundness part of the exam and also the compliance part. And, we're all for a sound compliance approach, but, some compliance exams take as long as safety and soundness exams.
Okay. And when the regulations are applied, are they different for bigger banks and littler banks, or are they the same?
The same.
Okay. Ms. Hunter and Ms. Thompson, is that the intent? Is the intent to regulate very small institutions, community banks per se, and large institutions the same way, or is there a difference based on size and risk when you apply regulations?
There is a difference based on size and risk. We apply the rules, but based on the riskiness of the institution and in particular their activities. One thing of concern is Dodd-Frank, and we want to make sure that when we implement Dodd-Frank, FDIC always issues guidance. And when we issue guidance to the industry describing what the new rules are, we've asked for a description of how these rules will impact community banks, because, again, many of them don't.
How do you ensure that those regulations are, in effect, different based on size and risk when the regulators hit the ground?
We have examination procedures that we give our examiners, and we work together, all regulators, including CSBS. We meet once a month on the FFIEC and Task Force on Supervision, and we talk about different policies, examination procedures.
Okay. Is there any sort of transparency so that the banks know that there's some difference? That's okay. I mean, Ms. Hunter's going to be in a second.
I was only going to echo those comments, and it's really in the application of the procedures. If the bank it's not complex, there are not a lot of activities, then a lot of the procedures don't apply, and examiners do calibrate that. I guess the transparency might be in any published manuals, but you really couldn't detect it from that.
And I've talked to Ben Bernanke about this too. So, and you're here, you're a little closer to the ground, at least I hope you are, okay, than he is. And the real question is how do you know the regulators are doing what you think they're doing on the ground? I mean, how do you make that assessment? Or do you have people? I mean, how do you make the assessment?
Well, that's an excellent question, and one we wrestle with often, but I'll tell you how we go about it. First of all, we have a lot of communication with the offices where the field work is actually conducted. They're responsible for making sure that the examiners are following the guidelines and using balanced judgments and calibrating their judgment about what to do with the risk that's there. That said, we have a lot of training. We have national phone calls that will give guidance to examiners where they all dial in to hear from the person who crafted a rule as to what's intended. And we spent a lot of time communicating with the field about that. I will tell you that some of the committees that I referenced in my statement and the testimony, we get input from that. We follow up immediately. So we hear that there's an issue where examiners might be doing one thing or another. We'll go back out and say, is this happening? And so it's really an ongoing dialogue.
And I understand that, especially for what we come through, it's, it's kind of not on my watch is this kind of stuff going to happen. But I can tell you that unequivocally, across the board, every time I meet with the community bankers, they talk about the inconsistency in application of regulation. And I believe them. And so the question is how can we make this process more transparent so that we can ensure that, in fact, those regulations are applied in an even-handed and fair way? Any ideas?
Yes, well, one of the things we have been doing is working closely with the CSBS, because I think the state commissioners are often a great source of information where we're seeing that there isn't, if they're seeing inconsistency or we're hearing from bankers there's inconsistency, we do follow up. Now, trying to get consistency across 50 states and, all those jurisdictions, it's a constant effort, but it's one that we're committed to doing.
I don't want to have the members on the panel get in the scrap, but I just asked Mr. Ducrest if there was a change, if there was a difference in the way big banks and small banks were being regulated. At least that's what I thought the question was, and said, not really. And so the question becomes, and I point this out because it's a problem, and you guys don't need to wear it. Everybody needs to wear it. And I think there's more work that needs to be done to make sure that the regulation fits the risk. And I do not see community banks as causing the financial crisis that almost took us under.
Right.
But by the same token, I see them supporting small businesses that create jobs, and I think everybody up here's already said that, and you've said it too. And so there needs to be, and it's not easy, but there needs to be some regulatory consistency.